it's the number that has been scientifically arrived at.
Sink the boat.
But I think going over 18, I'm fine at 18.
Yeah.
And if we need to keep the door open for folks,
That's an alternative, yeah. So we may have, I know we've got a lot of folks on the testimony list today. I don't know that whether they'll all be expecting or hoping to be in the room, but
They know they might need some insurance.
thank you.
We have that separate.
Yeah, okay, good. And we're not scheduled to take any testimony until 10, so nobody's thinking otherwise. Okay, good. Just a housekeeping thing I was gonna mention too. I Laura and I had a sort of running conversation about posting documents for the next day so that when you got home in the evening and had nothing better to do, if you wanted to preview the testimony that we were gonna see in the morning, you could go in and find it. And it turns out, I must have made that up. The system doesn't allow her to do that.
To send us.
Well, to post it as under tomorrow's date. However, the documents are often there under another tab, like reports and resources or witness. So if anybody is interested in, just FYI for the future, the reports are there, possibly they're just not under the date because the date isn't there yet. And that's a system restriction.
And if you put it in under a person's name, does that have to have a date right off?
I don't know the ins and outs of what happens in the background, but in any case, it won't be, you won't see tomorrow's day there until tomorrow comes.
We're Wednesday.
Yes.
Yeah, so today we're Wednesday. Yep. And we've got about 40 minutes before we're gonna have witnesses come in to speak to us about farm to school. And I thought we could use that time to two things. One, just to see whether there are any questions or discussion or things that maybe you thought about after the current use testimony that we had. We had some yesterday and then some last week as well. Yesterday, presentation really specific to the forestry current use. And then second, use this time to talk about questions, ideas, what's on your mind so far regarding the Universal School Meals Bill, which we will continue to take testimony on later today and tomorrow. But we can sort of do a check-in and see where people are thinking. But first, let me just see if I can get everyone who's here with us today around the room to remind us who they are. Honor, would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Again?
I'm Honor Horton. I'm the executive director of
Good morning.
Amy Schollenberger, friendly lobbyist for many things ag.
Teddy Waz is acting Universal School Meals Campaign Manager with Hunger Free Vermont.
I'm Maeve Keck. I'm the intern with the campaign.
Good morning. Have we had you before? Have we met you before?
No, I've watched a lot of live streams.
Okay.
Yeah, this is my first time here.
Very good. Well, welcome. Current use, anybody have any questions or thoughts on that conversation from yesterday that you wanted to toss around a little bit?
Who was it that was I think maybe it was you, John, that compared current use program to a payment for ecosystem services. Was that the equivalency you were?
I just wondered if it was sort of a forerunner, right?
Yeah, it kind of seems like it was. I thought that was an interesting comment.
It's sort of in-kind payment too.
Mm-hmm.
It dates back to
79.
way back, yeah. So for a forerunner, certainly, possibly, maybe before anybody was thinking about ecosystem services or payments for.
You know, on that point, because when taxes started rising in the 70s precipitously, they haven't slowed down much, but the thinking behind current use was people cost municipalities money. You had to plow roads for the travel, you had to build and maintain schools, educate children. But forests don't put an economic burden on a community. Therefore, if someone had 200 acres of woodland and they were charged and there was 2 acres owning a lot of money, it would be impossible to taxes would rise too sharply. And so that was the thinking, 45, 50 years ago, that forests don't burden the communities. No one was getting into the carbon storage back then. The fact that they had value for forest products that help society is just about as complex as it got, but it was a reality that they didn't really cost towns.
Now, do you know what made up the difference though, since it cost the state a lot of money with this grand bargain of current use to some extent? I mean, so was it a shift, a sort of tax policy shift to income tax or some other tax?
Can't answer.
Yeah, I always wondered how they afforded it.
I think the argument was in the past, or still is the economic driver behind working lands was the benefit,
Social value.
Well, and actual, income, think of dairies as the big one. If farmland is enrolled in current use, but they're bringing in, what is it? I don't know if it's 80% of dairies sold out of the state. That's money coming into the state that is a benefit economic driver. Involves working lands, forestry, 80% of the wood goes out of the state, is coming into the state. It's an economic driver. It's the working lands piece, I think, was always the argument of why it's a tax benefit, the way I understood it.
Your question though is also when those taxes suddenly weren't being collected, where was it shifted to?
Right.
Yeah, and now it's, since there's a statewide education fund, we had a different landscape back then. It wasn't statewide, and that'd be a good question to try and learn more about. Yesterday, I just noted that the very first slide, when they were talking about the sort of the origins or the purpose, the official line was preserve the working landscape and the rural character of the state. So.
It seems that if logging and dairy make up for the money lost in revenues, maybe that was the case in a more robust economic environment for logging and dairy, but we don't have that anymore. So, maybe it's worth the discussion of reviewing that. Is it still being managed the way that, the costs are offset by these activities?
Well, those fairly steep lines on the graph, again, yesterday, that showed the number of enrollees has continued to grow, although maybe that's leveling off. It wasn't as big an impact tax-wise as it is now, for sure. So it would have been easier at that, originally to say, well, we'll cover that here, but now, more and more, and I don't remember what the dollar amount is, but fairly significant. Mike?
Yeah, I was just in response to your point. The piece that I think has grown as the other pieces maybe have shrunk is what it means for tourism. What sort of working rural landscapes what open land and forest land means for driving tourist dollars to the state.
Yeah.
Which again is not sort of getting at the literal replacement in tax dollars, but in terms of economic drivers, I think that's the piece that has probably grown at the same or greater rate as the others have shrunk. And
But what is the program or programs that create a more tourist friendly environment? Is it 250? Is it current use? I mean, is it a redundancy of things? I mean, like, going back to the quote we heard the other day, Vermont is programs rich, but systems poor. If we had a better system that took tourism into consideration, but integrated a lot of these programs, I mean, maybe that's not our job, but I'm just seeing it from a perspective, from a viewer's perspective maybe we look at this and I don't know, maybe it could be better managed or organized and still get the same benefits for less money, less loss.
Again, some perspective, and I don't apologize for my age, but in the 1970s, I mortgaged a farm on Cross Hill Road in Duxbury, Vermont. It's 235 acres. 100 acres of timberland, 35 acres of field, 7-bedroom farmhouse, 2 barns. I paid $106,000. The taxes, this was before current use was an option, were $4,500. It went up. I couldn't hold on to that farm. I held on for 8.5 years and I sold it. I think I got $116,000. So why I'm telling you that story, not poor me, I couldn't afford the taxes. I could, we selectively cut wood. A neighbor cut the hay. But the point is, values were very different. 10 years earlier in Winhall, you could buy decent land for $100 an acre. At that point, the land had maybe gone up to $300 an acre. The house was worth, and 2 acres was more. But when you see that curve that David pointed out about the increased enrollment, the values that modern day Vermonters or families are facing with rising land values, nobody talks in those terms of $10 to $150 an acre, $100 an acre. That's such ancient history, it's not funny. So the incentive is serious, and the taxes are the valuations have gone way up. I had a choice. I was not a developer. I didn't want to subdivide it. So it actually cost me money to own that thing for almost a decade because and there was homeowners insurance. Anyway, so the valuations, I think we know it's good from a marketing for the Vermont look, the working lands, very, very important to Vermont, has been for 2 centuries, but I think it's a very positive program. You want to talk about the high-end carbon notion of the value forest if you don't cut a tree, what it does, it could justify the whole thing on that basis alone, as far as I'm concerned, as far as what it gets back versus what it costs the state. But that's little history in my opinion.
Henry, did you have?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up on what Mike said, and I don't know that I can say it in a clear way. But it's kind of a question that I've wrestled with or thought about a lot as far as the value, putting a quantitative value on what working lands provides for the state for tourism. And, when we talk about whether it's tax implications or culture or whatever, but that the value that we get from our landscape and culture here, what is that value and how do we quantify it? And more importantly, how do we return it to the people that create it? You know, because there's a tremendous amount of benefit in this state to our landscape. You know, there's a reason people come here, whether it's to snowmobile, ski, or mountain bike, or recreate in any way, or just to come here to have the peace that Vermont has. And that comes at a tremendous expense to the people that are working in that environment. And how do we, as a state, quantify that and make sure that that money or benefit is going back to the people that are creating it and doing the work? That's just a broad question, and if anybody has any great answers, it'd be great. But
Very well said.
Yeah, pretty clear.
It'll be
John, yeah.
interesting, you know, if you look at current use and Act 250, it seems current use has been a much better sort of model policy as far as keeping Vermont being Vermont, working lands working, than Act 250 is now. And I think they both have similar, you know, designs, but I think current use is still doing its job really well. Whereas Act 250, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Henry, I think that's always been the piece that's really hard to quantify, right? Because you can't, I mean, you can track the amount of money in ski passes or
Right.
hotel rooms, but there's so many other things that are just really hard to sort of compile into that bottom line of what is that? What is the fact that that's a field with cows in it or a forest to ride your bike through? What does that mean to the people who are coming here? Because I mean, even people who are, you know, you think there's like agritourism, right? But then there's like, you know, even somebody driving to Burlington, and part of the reason for their trip is to drive from Boston to Burlington and drive past all of those things that are between there, right? So yeah.
And, you know, this culture was valued a long time ago. New York State had open billboard laws. Massachusetts had open, you know, billboard laws. New Hampshire did. You'd cross from Bennington, from Hoosick, New York into Bennington, or on Route 4 from Hampton, Rutland, or into Rutland County, Fairhaven. And all of a sudden, you could see the landscape. There weren't these 50-foot long, 20-foot tall billboards. And that law was passed in 1967 in off-site advertising. I was down in Winhall when that happened, maybe it was 68. And the state has benefited from that law, that one law. It exposed the landscape and protected it. So that's been going on.
So is there a particular, so they're coming to us with something, right? We're talking about current use for.
So, yeah, I think that we are gonna have additional testimony from the tax department with a request for, trying to see whether that's on the copy of the agenda I have, with a request to make some, I don't want to characterize them as tweaks. I'm not sure how significant they are. But yeah, no, the hope was that we would have a pretty good understanding of how the system currently works, what its intent is, and you know, if along the way we have questions about any of that, and think up, you know, let's maybe want to think about this a little bit more. Folks might want to ask those questions. So.
One question I
Yeah.
ask maybe in the future is if when Danny and co at FPR are working on this roadmap, if there are any tweaks they would make to the current use to potentially help out with the forest economy futures. Or if it's really don't mess with it.
Yep. Now I'm looking online at 2:00 this afternoon. We can have Jill Remick be back in.
So there are some new models of looking at landscape that utilize, a great amount of information from academics regarding best use of land in relation to what kind of land it is, right? Like, where's the best place to have a forest? Where's the best place to have a farm? There are some of these models being presented as like, carbon sequestration through forestry work. Like, where's the best place in the West to plant this species of tree? And it would almost make sense to overlay that sort of lens on this program at some point where where each property is assessed in a bigger scope of like, what's the best use for this property? Not to say that, like my particular farm has quite a bit of forest on it. That may not be the best place for forest. Maybe it's better to be used as farmland, and maybe forest would be better planted somewhere else. I mean, a more comprehensive sort of plan than just site by site.
Yeah.
I don't know if that.
No, I think that's a really interesting idea. We don't have, we'll have to put that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. But, we are having a conversation this afternoon about a specific request, I think. But, this is a huge issue, and we will have more time as the session and next year come along too. So I think we can hold two different ideas or sort of broad concepts in our head at the same time. So I'm going to now ask whether folks have any thoughts on the other issue that we were discussing yesterday and are going to be discussing it today. So the Universal School Meals Bill. So we had Beth came in, Beth St. James walked us through the text of the bill that was introduced and is on our wall. Very similar to the legislation that was enacted last spring to have a 1-year extension or pilot program for the state funding Meals for All. We're going to take more testimony today, but just wanted to see if people had questions or thoughts. We started to have some discussion yesterday that I said, let's hold off on that because we just want to know what's in the bill right now. And then there'll be plenty of time. And we have plenty of time. So more time than 20 minutes, certainly, but. Okay.
So I'm definitely going to vote for this. I think the bottom line for me are children before money. However, I've engaged in some conversations this morning with both Republican and Democrats concerning this program. And there is a certain amount of concern around food waste and this program going to kids who don't necessarily need it. And I think it would behoove us to maybe, look at a way that we could issue this program with a certain amount of fiscal conservancy behind it. I mean, maybe that doesn't sound very popular, but
What would that look like?
I don't know. It's just words I'm putting out there. Yeah.
And by food waste,
Somebody.
Cost waste?
No, food waste. Specifically, somebody was mentioning that in their children's Chittenden County school, a lot of the food's just being wasted. Like a few bites are taken and then the plate's being thrown away. And, that's kind of the problem with free food is people kind of take it for granted and don't really respect it, especially kids. What are you thinking?
Well, I do think there's absolutely a fantastic point you've made about making sure that we aren't preparing and paying for more meals necessarily than we need. That is an area of waste that we should be very conscientious to not, be free about. But in terms of the children's eating behavior, I think that is just a normal.
You can't really control that, can you?
For that age group. Unfortunately, some children do have to think about that far more than others in terms of I don't know where my next meal is coming from, so I need to be very conscientious about eating every single bite of my plate, which is awful. But so I think in the behavior piece, that is perhaps not as much legislation oriented, but making these meals appealing and wholesome, that will be one aspect of preventing food waste. But in terms of the supply end of things, we can be definitely conscientious about that and preventing waste, I think.
Just,
I was just gonna say, one of the other things about food waste, and this happened to my nephew when he went from a private school to a public school, was he didn't have enough time to eat. So he even said, we compost at home. I feel like I should compost my food. He also said, I need more than 20 minutes to go from A to B to the food line. And I don't know how you restructure a school day, but I need more than 20 minutes to eat lunch.
This was something that I pointed out early on. 20 minutes is not civilized.
No,
It's not civilized.
And we're not teaching kids to be good, healthy eaters either. If you're just like wolfing down your food,
Agreed.
that's not good for your system. That's not going to be good for the next class you're going to. And I don't know, that's not something we can legislate, but that's something we can maybe agitate for.
Henry.
I was just wondering if there's been any like research or on like eating habits. I'm just thinking of like the way that, and this would be very complicated, but like the way that school lunch is or meals are distributed. We kind of joked about the second breakfast yesterday,
Yeah.
but like kids, it seems like from watching my own kids are grazer more, there's this new grazing idea of feeding your kids like small things incrementally throughout the day. And there's a lot less waste. When I give my kids a meal and it's got all the things on it, they're like, oh, we have to eat all this, and it's work to finish the whole plate. Whereas if they have a couple small meals throughout the day, they are much more efficient about the way they eat. I'm sure there's research out there, and I'm sure it comes down to how do you do that in a school setting and not interfere. But I just wondered if there's any schools out there or if there's any models out there that are doing that maybe increase efficiency of food intake.
There's a lot of grab and go, which I think would be helpful for that. I know for the high school age kids, especially breakfast, grab and go, I've heard anecdotally, is brilliant because it lets because the school day is not set up for an adolescent mind, a brain. It just isn't. And if you can sleep in even just an extra 20 minutes and then just grab your yogurt parfait or whatever, and then you decide when you want to eat it because you've got it with you. It's in your backpack. I don't know how you do that with lunches because they're hot, but that's an interesting thing that you mentioned that your kids are grazers and they're, what are they, 6 and 8?
Yeah, and I just wonder, like and it's changed completely, but when I was in school, getting a hot lunch, you went up and it was like they put the things on your plate and that's what you had, and it was like, yeah, you eat what you like here and maybe some of this and you throw out the rest.
Or you trade.
Yeah, or trade.
Yeah.
Mix it all.
Prison.
Yeah. But,
Who likes more? No.
I think trading has actually been an issue, and whether that was, there may have been some prohibition on not necessarily trading with the person next to you, but returning something that was, I remember that was a conversation a number of years ago, and I'm not sure where it stands at the moment.
Mike had his hand up ahead of me, but then
You're
I
okay,
would.
thank you for.
I was just to your point, Lucy, about the 20-minute piece. I know that there's language in the bill about counting it as instructional time, and so I wonder if there's something to be done there with.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Is there an ability to
Yeah.
extend that period because you can count?
Yeah, was that language specific to breakfast, or was it?
It was for all the meals. It said it counts as instructional,
Yeah,
all meals served should count as instructional time.
you're eating in the classroom, it would count as instructional.
Right, if you're bringing it back to the classroom, that's right, not if you're in the lunchroom.
No, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I'm just going back to where, I know Charles had a question and I had a question regarding, Charles's was broader, mine was specifically about in a community where there are known affluent families and the political pushback. I'm out of the closet when it comes to being supportive of universal free school meals. And it doesn't come blindly. I just talk to enough administrators, school board, blah, blah, blah. But the pushback is, well, why, if a family can afford to pay, isn't there a mechanism to do that? But in this room is Teddy and others that have given testimony, hopefully will again, that have done research on this very issue. So I could go by my gut, which is how I make a lot of decisions.
I can speak to that because I talked to Teddy yesterday about that exact same thing. So it's a multi-pronged issue because the folks who qualify for free and reduced lunch for a family of four make under $35,000 a year, which is nothing, which is half of what some government agency says you should actually make to be a family of four. So what happens is it's the $35,000 to $75,000 bracket of folks who actually don't qualify for, who don't. I was talking to my partner about this, and for a long time, she and her family of four made $35,000 a year. And she's like, we should have been on food stamps. We should have had EBT. And they didn't know it. And they were also a little too proud because some years they needed it, some years they didn't. And this just levels the playing field. And also the more kids who participate in this program, the less federal money we're leaving on the ground. So there's a fair amount of federal money that can be recouped by this. And I was reading one of the reports last night, and I was sort of shocked to see how many school districts, mine in particular in Grand Isle County, has never applied for certain kinds of federal aid and reimbursements for the farm to school program because they're just not doing it. But 45% of our kids in my school in Grand Isle qualify for free and reduced lunch, and in Alberg, 82% qualify, and we're leaving money on the table. We're leaving federal money that can offset the cost from the state of Vermont to pay for this program.
So we don't want to exclude.
We don't want to exclude, and it does really reduce the stigma. And I see that in the work I do at the food shelf, which is I'm seeing more affluent people come in because they're realizing I either pay my electric bill, my heating bill, or we skip dinner 3 nights a week. And that is starting to be a real factor, and hopefully inflation will come down. But in the meantime, people are spending 40% more on propane. And if you live in a trailer or a mobile home and you can only heat, not with kerosene, you're paying 40% more to heat your home. And that's got to come out of some part of your budget. So I think that's why. And I think the very affluent, that is a good question, but I think we just have to let everybody do it.
So I'm just making a list of things, and you all have the questions that you're asking, we can continue to pursue those. Charles, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I didn't want to give an impression yesterday or today that I'm against feeding children, because my wife and I take money every month to feed people on our own. Nobody told us what or how to do it. We just do it. So we always have to be creative personally. What concerns me is what I tried to say yesterday. I don't have a problem with feeding kids, but if you make it permanent, that's guaranteed that's going to turn into taxation, and inflation will not come down until we stop borrowing and printing money. Can't come down. So it's sooner or later with all these programs, where's all the money going to come from? People can only take so much taxes. So it's just.
Read the JFO report.
I don't have any answers. It's a sticky situation. So.
Josie, did you?
Oh, I was just gonna say, the JFO report actually gives a couple good examples of how we can pay for this by making some changes, and some are not gonna be appreciated, but I think it supports school nutrition. A 2%, not a 1 or 2 cent tax on sugared drinks. If you do 2 cents for every ounce of a sugared beverage, it's $31 million. Done. If you start taxing candy, because candy is not taxed right now, and because candy is counted as a food, it shouldn't be counted as a food. That can bring in 3 million. It's not a ton, but it's something that also sends a message that the state, it would help. But, I think some people are going to balk at, well, it's, you're taxing my soda. And I think about construction guys who will get taxed on their Gatorade or their power drinks. and I was talking to Jed about this yesterday, but when I was a smoker and the taxes went up on cigarettes, I had a choice. Do I stop smoking or do I pay the taxes? Well, for a couple of years, I paid the taxes. But I think there are ways that we can do this that also support what we're trying to do in terms of feeding kids in a healthier way. But I do agree with you, we do need to find the balance. And I don't know quite how we do that.
Mike?
Well, I would just say, it's not up for discussion about whether we would find where Vermont has a balanced budget. We don't print money. We don't, so we will, if we do this, it will be associated with where the money comes from. So that's not up for question or debate.
It's just how do we fund it?
The federal government too. That backs.
It already does, regardless of, whether we have universal meals. Lots and lots of money will come from the federal government to support school nutrition programs.
But our Vermont part will still be 29 million that needs to come out of our budget.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that piece will be answered in this bill, where that money comes from, right?
Maybe the question is, what is the return value of this $29 million? I mean, if it brings more than it costs, then, so if we were to be able to figure that amount out, like what does it mean to have kids in school who are well fed? I mean, they're going to do better in school. They're going to go off to college. They're going to earn more income. They're going to do more for their family, perhaps for the state if they stay in state. That's the hard part too.
Who can help me with math for just a second? Because my calculator, for every dollar we spend on school meals, it puts $1.60 back in the Vermont economy.
That's for locally produced fresh and.
Right.
That was right, yeah. I think that was specific to the.
Who came up with that? Was that the JFO?
It's the University of Vermont, 2016 study, I believe.
4.6 million, right there, so.
But I was just gonna suggest that maybe, I know we're gonna hear from JFO this afternoon, and so maybe we could pivot in our last few minutes and if there are any other sort of like broad thoughts on.
I have one. Truth be told.
Which is just related to the conversation a couple of us were having last night about how, is there a way to more deeply embed putting in the ears of the next several people we're going to hear from this morning to more deeply embed the farm to school piece in the universal school meals legislation. Understanding that right now there's the incentive program, which is a separate piece of legislation, and other ways to more fully, incorporate farm to school and local purchasing into universal school meals. And are there systemic things that need to happen and would be helpful to happen in legislation, like we were talking about, through sort of capacity building? What are the differences between the districts that can do a lot of this work and the districts that can't, and are there ways that we could sort of fill those gaps?
I like that.
From a capacity standpoint to make it more possible.
Yeah.
And I had the same thought, and then on the other side, let's call it school to farm, I'd love to look at the waste compost side of things, because I just know in our discussions in this committee over the last years, a lot of like sort of compost economies have changed. And so as far as I know, Grow Solar takes a lot of our compost, municipal, school, whatever, from our transfer stations, and it all goes up to Maine to a biodigester, which is about 4th or 5th on the pyramid of how we should be using it. So if that can be tied into this might be a good moment to do that.
Interesting.
We've just been listening here, but the topic of tax and sugar drinks and candy is not a new topic. It's been discussed several times in the State House and never been able to move that forward.
Good to know.
I think for school lunches, we have to put it on something that's reliable. And not onto something like that, because otherwise you're gonna end up with an unfunded mandate,
Right.
then that's gonna be, just a back on the local tax there. So you gotta be careful about that. And as far as food waste, not every kid's gonna like the same thing. So you're gonna have food waste, no matter what you do. And like someone was just saying, compost now is much more prevalent than it used to be, so it's not to, it's gonna end up, not gonna end up in the landfill.
Right.
Some use.
Makes sense.
Well,
And then the other thing, one other thing.
Rodney's on a roll.
Talk about the people that wanna say they wanna contribute to pay for their kids' lunch. There's nothing stopping people from donating money to the school system.
Right.
Good point.
Good point.
I was also, I wanted to correct one point I made yesterday as well about being concerned about ebb and flow of federal dollars in helping to support this program, because I was corrected that the federal program to subsidize school meals, it either stays the same or it increases with inflation every year. And so I just wanted to make that very clear that that is not like a gap that we would, spontaneously be needing to fill as well down the road. So that's a little bit reassuring to me too.
I mean, what if, so there was a conversation this morning about our new Republican majority Congress maybe not going for a lot of the budget changes that Biden is putting forward. I mean, could it be under threat at some point? I mean, it's an entitlement program and that's what they're really targeting right now.
I think that might be a good question to ask on Friday when we have Senator Welch in, because I think the Farm Bill may cover that. And in any case, it's a question that I think is posed to him. Well, why don't we take 5 minutes to stretch? We've got witnesses that I think are ready to